The baby's cry came from the river. At first, Duke Evander Valehurst believed the storm had deceived him. Rain struck the Blackwater in silver lashes, wind screamed through mountain pines, and thunder rolled above the castle. No infant could survive in that furious current. Yet the cry rose again, thin, terrified, unmistakably human. Evander reined his stallion so sharply that the animal reared. "Your Grace!" Captain Gideon Shaw shouted through the rain. Evander turned toward the swollen water. Command had taught him to distinguish fear from confusion, and grief had taught him how suffering sounded when others refused to hear it. "There," he said. A wicker cradle spun from behind an uprooted willow, vanishing between waves before surfacing beneath a torn garland of white roses. It raced toward the eastern channel, where the river narrowed and plunged over Valehurst Falls. Evander drove his horse down the bank. Gideon called after him, but the Duke entered the flood without hesitation. The stallion fought bravely until a submerged branch struck its legs. Horse and rider went down. Freezing water closed over Evander's head, filling his ears with the river's roar. He surfaced against a rock, dragged himself upright, and saw the cradle sweep past. The child cried once more. Evander lunged. His fingers caught flowering vines woven around the wicker rim. The current pulled at his shoulders, demanding the cradle, but he braced one boot between two stones and hauled it against his chest. He stood with the river breaking around him, protecting the life beneath his coat. Gideon and 2 guards dragged them ashore. Inside the cradle lay a baby girl, perhaps 3 months old. Her cheeks were cold, but she breathed. Coarse servant's cloth had been stitched over an ivory lace gown, as though someone had tried to hide the wealth into which she had been born. When Evander lifted the covering, something red flashed against her breast. His hand stopped. The ruby pendant was small, ancient, and unmistakable. He had fastened it around Elowen's neck on their wedding night, when she had laughed softly and accused him of choosing a jewel too solemn for happiness. On its back, beneath the Valehurst crest, were the words they had chosen together. Beyond death. For 3 years the kingdom had called Duchess Elowen faithless. Her carriage had been found abandoned near the coast, its velvet seat stained with blood, her veil torn, and forged letters scattered like cruel confessions. The court insisted she had fled with another man. Evander had refused to divorce her, yet eventually even he had stopped searching. Now her pendant rested above a stranger's beating heart. The baby opened gray-green eyes, the precise color of Elowen's, and closed one tiny hand around Evander's wedding ring. He found the note beneath her blankets. The ink had bled, but he recognized the slant of every letter. "Evander, she's our daughter. Her name is Leora. Save her before they find her. Trust no one marked by the silver thorn, not even beneath your own roof. I never abandoned you. I never betrayed you. If you remember the woman I was, follow the white roses." A rifle cracked. Wood splintered beside Leora's head. Evander covered her as hooded riders appeared along the opposite bank. Silver brooches gleamed upon their cloaks, each shaped like a thorned branch. Gideon drew his pistol. "Take the mill tunnel." The guards returned fire while Evander ran toward the ruins downstream. He slipped through a broken doorway and entered a passage once used to turn the mill wheel. Darkness swallowed him, leaving only Leora's frightened cries and the thunder of hooves above. He knelt behind a fallen beam and examined the cradle. Cork lined its base. Waxed canvas sealed its seams. Whoever had placed Leora in the river had not discarded her. They had built her a vessel and calculated where the flood would carry her. Among the roses, Evander found a sprig of silverleaf, an herb Elowen used to mark danger in her private botanical code. The white mountain roses themselves grew in only one cultivated garden within 50 miles. St. Orizen's sanctuary belonged to Lady Seraphine Valehurst, Evander's aunt, former guardian, and the woman who had persuaded him that Elowen no longer wished to be found. Leora quieted beneath his coat. As Evander read the note again, grief hardened into purpose. His wife was certainly still alive. His daughter had been hunted. And the first road toward both of them led not beyond his walls, but directly beneath his own roof. By midnight, every bell in Valehurst announced the rescued child's death. Evander entered the castle through the abandoned chapel passage, carrying Leora beneath his cloak while Gideon sealed the tunnel behind them. Only Mrs. Wren was summoned to Elowen's apartments. She stared at the ruby pendant, crossed herself, then accepted the infant. "She has her Grace's eyes," she whispered. The apartments had remained untouched for 3 years. Dust silvered Elowen's books, and her gowns waited inside cedar wardrobes for a woman the kingdom had condemned. Evander had called preserving the room's duty. Now he understood it had been hope wearing mourning clothes. Leora refused milk and cried until her body trembled. Nothing soothed her until Evander opened an unfinished music box beneath Elowen's bed. Its melody had accompanied their courtship. At the first notes, Leora quieted and reached toward him. "Leora," he murmured, remembering the name Elowen once chose for a daughter. "Light after darkness." The child caught his finger. Something long barricaded within him yielded. Before dawn, Evander returned to the evidence room. Elowen's disappearance had begun with a locked carriage found beside the coastal road. The coachman was dead, blood marked the velvet seat, her veil lay torn beneath the wheel. Letters suggested she had fled with Dr. Lucan, a physician who shared her fascination with botanical medicine. When Lucan's coat washed ashore, the court declared their guilt proven. Seraphine had urged Evander to divorce Elowen and save the family name. He had refused, but the search conquered him. He had mistaken exhaustion for acceptance and silence for proof. Now he spread the letters beneath lamplight. Their handwriting imitated Elowen's graceful slant, yet one line promised devotion lasting until blue belladonna covered the hills. Evander remembered her correcting him in their garden, laughter brightening her face as she explained that belladonna blossoms were dusky purple, never blue. Elowen would sooner forget her own name than misuse a poisonous plant. The letters were forged. At sunrise, Evander announced that the river child had died. A coffin waited inside chapel, weighted with stones. Nobles, servants, and villagers gathered while rain whispered against the windows. Lady Seraphine Valehurst stood nearest the altar, elegant in black silk. At 52, she possessed the composed beauty of a portrait and the authority of the woman who had governed Valehurst during Evander's youth. She pressed a handkerchief to dry eyes as the priest described the unnamed infant. Then he announced that the ruby pendant had been buried with her. Relief flickered across Seraphine's face. It vanished almost instantly, but Evander saw it. Their gazes met, and something colder than suspicion passed between them. That afternoon, a maid entered Elowen's rooms carrying warmed milk. Mrs. Wren noticed its bitter scent before feeding Leora. Evander seized the girl, but the corridor lamps suddenly failed. A hidden door opened in the darkness. By the time Gideon restored the flames, the maid had disappeared. On the nursery carpet lay a silver thorn brooch. Evander doubled the guards but trusted none of them. The enemy knew the child lived, knew where she slept, and moved through passages built for the Valehurst family. Near dusk, a boy slipped from behind the stable wall. Tomas Reed was 12, narrow-shouldered and mud-streaked, with the watchful expression of someone accustomed to being overlooked. "I carried letters from the Duchess," he said, after everyone claimed she was gone. Tomas explained that Elowen's messages had arrived through market women and traveling healers. Following instructions, he delivered each one to Seraphine's secretary. None reached Evander. One sentence appeared repeatedly: "Tell my husband the locked carriage was empty before it reached the sea." The blood, veil, and letters had been planted afterward. Tomas then revealed why he had remained silent. His mother had been taken to St. Orson's after refusing to surrender inherited land. Officials declared her dead, but Tomas saw her months later behind a barred window. She spoke of a prisoner called Number 7, a healer who taught women to read and promised her husband would come once he learned the truth. "What did Number 7 look like?" Evander asked. Tomas swallowed. Gray-green eyes. Golden brown hair. A scar across her left palm. Evander knew that scar. Elowen had received it while rescuing him from a shattered greenhouse pane. Outside, Valehurst bells mourned a child who remained alive. Inside, Evander folded the forged letters and finally named his greater shame. Elowen had never stopped calling for him. Someone beneath his roof had simply ensured he never heard. Before sunrise, Evander rode north with Gideon and Tomas, leaving Leora under Mrs. Wren's protection. Elowen's intercepted letters mentioned Briar Glen, a village folded between pine-covered hills beyond St. Orson's. By noon, its stone cottages emerged through mist. The villagers fell silent when Evander entered the square. He showed no title or crest, presenting himself as a cavalry officer searching for a missing healer named Nell Rowan. Recognition moved uneasily through the crowd. An old woman crossed herself. A shopkeeper muttered that Nell had brought misfortune. Only Ada Pike, the village baker, met Evander's gaze. "She saved half these people," Ada said. "They repaid her by deciding sorrow was evidence of sin." Inside the bakery, beside cooling loaves, Ada revealed what Elowen had endured. Nearly 2 years after disappearing, she had stumbled into Briar Glen during a winter storm, barefoot and feverish, wearing a gray institutional dress. She called herself Nell Rowan and claimed her husband had died abroad. Elowen could not use her true name. Cashin's agents watched churches, post houses, and physicians for any trace of the missing Duchess. Anyone sheltering her could be arrested. She therefore occupied an abandoned shepherd's cottage and survived by treating burns, delivering infants, and preparing remedies from mountain plants. Her skill won gratitude, but her secrecy nourished cruelty. Villagers demanded her husband's name and burial place. When she produced neither certificate nor grave, they called her the Nameless Widow. Men left insults on her door. Women who accepted her medicines refused to sit beside her in chapel. Then Elowen's pregnancy began to show. The whispers became accusations. The parish committee denied her winter coal because she could not prove she was married. A farmer's wife barred Elowen from her house although Elowen had saved her son from fever. Children, repeating their parents, followed her through the market chanting that her baby had no father. She never answered them cruelly, Ada said. That somehow made them crueler. Evander's jaw tightened. He had faced cavalry charges without flinching, yet the image of Elowen carrying their unborn child through a jeering crowd stripped discipline from him. Why did she never contact me? She tried. Ada produced 3 envelopes returned unopened. Each bore Evander's name and the Valehurst seal Elowen had pressed using her pendant. Across every envelope someone had stamped, "Recipient refuses correspondence." Evander stared at the lie created in his name. Ada explained how the child had been conceived. Months before arriving in Briar Glen, Elowen learned Evander would attend a masked winter gathering near the northern estates. She entered disguised as a servant, intending to expose St. Orisons. Cashin's spy drugged Evander's wine, but Elowen found him in a deserted conservatory. For several hours recognition pierced the haze. Evander remembered fragments he had dismissed as a fever dream. Elowen's cold hands holding his face, white roses scattered across a tiled floor, and her voice pleading, "Remember me when morning teaches you to doubt." Cashin's men discovered her before dawn. She escaped temporarily, while Evander awoke alone and was persuaded grief had invented the encounter. Months later, hidden in Briar Glen, Elowen realized she carried his child. She endured humiliation because revealing Leora's father would have exposed them both. Every night, Ada saw her speaking toward the ruby pendant, promising her unborn daughter that Evander was honorable and would come once truth reached him. Truth never did. A forged newspaper eventually announced Evander's coming marriage. Elowen wept, then burned the page, refusing to condemn him through evidence delivered by strangers. Soon afterward, someone reported the pregnant healer to St. Orisons in exchange for money. Cashin's riders seized her during snowfall and told Briar Glen she had fled owing debts. Ada led Evander to the abandoned cottage. Its windows were broken, yet bundles of dried silverleaf still hung above the hearth. Tomas found a loose floorboard beneath the bed. Inside lay Elowen's journal, wrapped in oilcloth beside white roses and lists of vanished women. The final page contained an unfinished letter. Our child must never believe she was fatherless. Her father loved her before he knew she existed. If I cannot reach him, I will build a road from whatever remains, thread, flowers, or water. Evander closed the journal, but something slipped from its binding, a charcoal sketch of St. Orison's eastern wall. Behind 7 barred windows, Elowen had drawn an 8th opening hidden beneath the riverline. Tomas traced it with one shaking finger. "That is not a window," he whispered. "It is a way inside." St. Orisons rose above the Blackwater like a pale fortress, iron fencing strangling gardens of white mountain roses. Even its bells sounded restrained. Evander arrived wearing the sash of a ducal inspector. Gideon accompanied him as secretary, while Tomas hid near the drainage channel sketched in Elowen's journal. They could not storm the sanctuary. Cashin held warrants declaring its residents unstable, and several magistrates served him. Without proof, Evander would appear to be a grieving husband attacking a charity. Lord Cashin Rook welcomed him beneath the marble portico. At 39, Cashin possessed the bloodless beauty of a court statue. His coat bore a thorn-shaped brooch. He bowed warmly, but his eyes measured Evander like locks measuring keys. "Our unfortunate ladies require discipline," Cashin explained while guiding him through spotless corridors. "Many arrive burdened by delusions, ingratitude, or moral weakness." "Do they arrive willingly?" Cashin smiled. "Illness rarely recognizes its own need for treatment." Women in gray uniforms worked silently behind barred doors. Instead of names, black numbers had been stitched above their hearts. When Evander asked why, Cashin claimed anonymity protected respectable families from scandal. A woman carrying linen stumbled. An attendant called her 42 and ordered her upright. She whispered, "My name is Ruth," before fear sealed her mouth. Evander's hands tightened behind his back. "A refuge should return dignity." "Dignity," Cashin replied, "is expensive. Obedience costs considerably less." The ledgers listed widows, abandoned mothers, and heiresses as deceased or mentally unfit. Their property passed to trustees connected to Seraphine. Several infants were recorded as stillborn beside payments from wealthy households. In the sewing room, Evander noticed a shawl embroidered with Elowen's private crest, a crescent woven through rosemary. Cashin dismissed it as an old donation. Then, from somewhere behind the northern wall, a music box began playing the melody Elowen had used to soothe Leora. Cashin immediately ordered the chapel bell rung. Its violent peals drowned the delicate tune. "Old buildings carry sounds strangely," he said. "So do guilty men." Their gazes held until an attendant announced a disturbance below. Cashin ended the inspection, but Evander deliberately left his signet beneath a bench, giving Gideon reason to return. While servants searched, Tomas crawled through the submerged opening beneath the eastern wall. The passage emerged behind an herb room where dried lavender concealed the smell of damp stone. Tomas followed a baby's faint whimper into a hidden maternity wing. Empty cradles lined the nearby chamber. Mara Fenwick appeared from the shadows, gripping a candle. The 48-year-old midwife looked exhausted beyond age. When Tomas showed Elowen's sketch, terror crossed her face. "You should not have come. The Duke rescued Leora." Mara's candle nearly fell. Relief weakened her knees, but approaching footsteps forced her to draw Tomas into a linen cupboard. Through its slats he watched Cashin enter with 2 guards. Cashin demanded to know whether number 7 had revealed where she hid the original ledger. Mara said Elowen had spoken no useful word since her daughter disappeared. Cashin warned that Seraphine wanted the Duchess moved before Evander returned. Once the ledger was found, both mother and child would be removed from every record. After he departed, Mara told Tomas the truth. Elowen had discovered Seraphine's network while investigating unnatural death rates at charitable hospitals. Dr. Lucan copied financial records with her. Cashin killed him, abducted Elowen, and staged the carriage scandal. She remained alive only because she alone knew where the original ledger was hidden. Her pregnancy had been concealed beneath loose uniforms. When Leora was born, imprisoned women sang through the night to hide her cries. For 3 months they shared food, blankets, and watch duties, protecting the child as proof that number 7 still possessed a name. When Seraphine learned of Leora, she ordered the baby taken before sunrise. Every road and bridge was guarded. Only the flooded river remained unwatched. Elowen remembered that the eastern current curved past Evander's hunting road. With Mara she reinforced a cradle using cork, waxed canvas, and hollow wood. She added her pendant, coated flowers, and the final note. She did not cast her baby away, Mara whispered as guards returned overhead. She sent Leora to the only person she still trusted. Then a melody drifted through the wall. Mara pressed Tomas's hand against one loose stone. From beyond it came a woman's fragile voice, singing to the daughter she no longer held. Number 7 was not waiting to be discovered. Elowen was waiting for Evander to remember how to find her. Mara escaped St. Orzens before dawn, leading Tomas through the drainage tunnel while guards searched the upper corridors. She refused to enter Valehurst Castle. Certain Seraphine watched every gate, so Tomas guided Evander to a ruined chapel beside the Blackwater. The midwife waited beneath a broken window, rain silvering her gray hair. When Evander entered, she lowered herself before him. "I helped them steal children," she confessed. "Fear kept my hands obedient long after my conscience understood." Evander wanted names, entrances, and the exact location of Elowen's cell. Mara gave him something more painful, the final hours before Leora entered the river. For 3 months, Elowen hid her daughter inside St. Orzen's abandoned herb room. Imprisoned women surrendered portions of bread and took turns guarding the passage. Mara watched Elowen grow weaker while giving everything to keep Leora warm. When Seraphine discovered the child, Cashin ordered Mara to bring Leora to the northern office before sunrise. No cradle would be returned. Mara warned Elowen. Together they sealed wicker with waxed canvas, packed cork beneath its base, and filled hollow wooden rails with air. Elowen wrapped warmed herbs inside the blankets, fastened her pendant around Leora's neck, and stitched the river map in colored thread. Then she held her daughter for the last time. "You are not unwanted," Elowen whispered. "You are being sent toward love." Mara carried the cradle through the drainage tunnel while Elowen remained behind. She released the sanctuary horses, scattered smoking herbs through the laundry, and rang the infirmary bell until every guard turned toward her. Cashin discovered the deception too quickly. Elowen deliberately fled toward the western bridge, drawing riders away from Mara. At the river, Mara heard pursuit approaching. She placed Leora into the eastern current and watched the cradle catch the path Elowen had predicted. "She did not abandon your daughter," Mara told Evander. "She gave the river instructions." Evander looked toward the water. Until then he had imagined Elowen's choice through terror. Now he saw its discipline. Trapped behind walls, she had transformed memory, medicine, motherhood, and faith into one impossible road home. Mara handed him copied birth records naming women declared dead and infants sold. Before she could describe Elowen's hidden cell, hooves surrounded the chapel. Cashin's riders shattered the remaining windows. Gideon returned fire while Evander pulled Mara behind the stone altar. Tomas escaped through a burial passage carrying the records, but Mara remained to bar the door behind him. "Find the ledger," she urged Evander. "It is the only truth they cannot purchase." The riders seized her as Evander and Gideon escaped through the river crypt. By nightfall, Cashin's message arrived at Valehurst. Surrender Leora and every record, or number 7 and the midwife would vanish before sunrise. Gideon urged patience. Without the original ledger, royal officials controlled by Cashin could accuse Evander of abducting a sanctuary child. Rage demanded an assault. Love demanded he avoid the mistake his enemy expected. Inside Elowen's apartments, Mrs. Wren discovered unusual stitches beneath Leora's blanket. Evander compared them with Elowen's botanical code. The flowers formed letters. Their stems created a map leading to the ancestral crypt. Behind Elowen's fireplace, he found a narrow staircase descending beneath the castle. The map ended at a broken angel statue. Inside its hollow chest lay the original ledger. Its pages recorded stolen estates, falsified deaths, bribed judges, and infants transferred like property. Seraphine's signature appeared repeatedly. The final entries bore another name. Evander's father had founded the network. Elowen had been sacrificed because exposing Seraphine would also destroy the Valehurst legacy. At a banquet that evening, Evander announced that he accepted Elowen's betrayal and intended to remarry. He praised Seraphine for preserving their house. Pride softened her caution. After midnight, she entered Leora's nursery carrying a pillow. The cradle was empty. Evander stepped from the darkness holding the ledger. Seraphine abandoned gentleness. She declared Elowen could have lived comfortably by surrendering the book and child. When Evander called love Elowen's strength, his aunt laughed. Love made her predictable. Before he could arrest her, a guard attacked Gideon. A hidden panel opened. Elsewhere, Mrs. Wren cried out. Evander reached Elowen's bedroom too late. Rain blew through the open passage, Leora's ribbon lying upon the floor. Seraphine had escaped and the baby was gone. The storm had followed them home. A note pinned beneath the ribbon demanded the ledger at sunrise inside the abandoned glasshouse. Below it, Seraphine had added 6 words. This time the river cannot save her. While Evander prepared for the glasshouse exchange, Tomas returned to St. Orizon's alone. He entered through the river passage before sunrise, using keys Mara had hidden inside the copied birth records. Above him, bells summoned guards to search the grounds. Below, he followed Elowen's melody through the damp corridor until he reached the loose stone Mara had shown him. Behind it stood a sealed iron door. Tomas unlocked it and entered a chamber scarcely wider than a grave. Names covered every wall, carved into the stone in different hands. Some were accompanied by estates, villages, or children's birth dates. Elowen had preserved the identities of women Cashin intended history to forget. She sat beneath the smallest window, wearing a gray dress marked 7. Captivity had thinned her face and threaded pale strands through her golden-brown hair, but her eyes remained fiercely alive. When Tomas spoke her name, she rose unsteadily, one hand searching the wall for support. "You are Tomas Reed," she whispered. "Did my letters reach him?" "Not then." The answer wounded her without surprising her. Tomas stepped closer. But he found Leora. He rode into Blackwater and pulled her from the river. He knows everything now. Elowen covered her mouth. For 3 years, Cashin's threats had failed to make her weep. Those words shattered the discipline that cruelty could not. She was alive? She is alive. The Duke named her Leora just as you asked. He never divorced you. He kept your rooms untouched. Elowen pressed her scarred palm against the stone names, drawing strength from those beside her even in absence. Then we leave together. Tomas opened nearby cells, but Elowen refused the shortest escape. The sanctuary held women, children, and Mara in its punishment wing. Freedom purchased by abandoning them would resemble Cashin's cruelty too closely. She moved through the corridors with purpose, directing prisoners into laundry passages and distributing damp cloth against smoke. Cashin had ordered the records burned, intending to destroy evidence and blame Number 7 for the disaster. Flames climbed the archive curtains while guards locked the outer wards. Elowen broke the first lock with an iron candlestick. "Tell one another your names," she commanded. "If we become separated, carry every name you hear." The women answered through smoke. "I am Ruth Bellamy. I am Agnes Thorne. I am Violet Harrow." Each declaration passed backward along the line until numbers became people again. Tomas freed Mara from the punishment chamber, and she led the mothers toward the eastern gate. Elowen remained behind to release 2 children hidden in the nursery. Cashin intercepted her beside the river stairs. His polished charm had vanished. He revealed that Seraphine never intended to exchange Leora. The glass house was a trap meant to hold Evander while Cashin recovered the ledger and escaped across the northern border. Once Seraphine had served her purpose, he would leave her to face the crown alone. "You survived because I allowed it," he said. "No," Elowen answered. "I survived despite everything you permitted yourself." She flung medicinal powder from her sleeve into his eyes. As Cashin recoiled, Tomas released the river gate. Floodwater surged across the steps, dividing Cashin from his guards. Elowen, Tomas, and Mara mounted sanctuary horses and rode toward Valehurst with the freed women following by wagon. At the abandoned glasshouse, Evander walked beneath broken panes carrying the ledger. Dead vines twisted around marble pillars and rain fell through the roof. Seraphine stood beside Leora's cradle inside an iron cultivation chamber. "The book," she demanded. Evander surrendered it. Seraphine fed its pages into a brazier and watched them blacken. Then she ordered 4 guards to kill him. Evander had anticipated her betrayal. The burned ledger was a copy. Gideon had already departed with the original for the Queen's court. Drawing the sword concealed beneath his coat, Evander fought through the guards while Seraphine retreated toward the cliff doors. He reached the cultivation chamber, but its iron lock resisted every strike. Rainwater poured through the shattered roof, collecting around the cradle. Leora awakened, her cries rising above the storm. "You cannot save everyone," Seraphine called. Evander attacked the lock until his hands numbed. Water climbed around the cradle's wheels. He had found his daughter once against a river. Now she was trapped inside one Seraphine had built around her. Hoofs thundered outside. The glass house doors burst inward. A gray-cloaked rider crossed the threshold and dismounted before her horse stopped. She ran through falling rain, her golden-brown hair loosening around a face Evander had mourned, doubted, and searched for in every dream. For one suspended heartbeat, husband and wife stared across 3 stolen years. Evander could not speak her name. Elowen did. The past offered them no mercy. Then Leora cried between them, and the Duchess behind the wall ran toward her child. Elowen reached the flooded chamber as Evander drove his sword beneath the iron door. "The lower pane," Elowen said. "Break its corners." Evander obeyed. The glass collapsed inward, and Elowen crawled through the narrow opening. Water soaked her gray dress as she lifted the cradle above the rising flood. Evander tore the warped frame apart, cutting a passage large enough to pull mother and child free. Elowen gathered Leora against her heart. The baby quieted, recognizing the voice that had sung behind stone. Elowen kissed her daughter's brow, then looked at Evander across the small, breathing miracle between them. He wanted to touch her. Instead he stepped back. "You found her," Elowen whispered. "You sent her to me." A pistol fired into the glasshouse roof. Cashin entered through the northern doors with armed riders, his face stripped of courtly charm. Seraphine turned toward him in relief, but Cashin ordered his men to seize her. "You were useful," he told her. "Do not confuse that with being necessary." Seraphine finally understood that the empire she had protected had no loyalty. Cashin intended to abandon her as the sole architect of the crimes, escape with the ledger, and use Leora to force Evander's silence. He caught Elowen by the arm and dragged her toward the cliff road. Evander placed Leora in Mara's hands and followed. "Protect our daughter," Elowen shouted. "I will not accept a choice invented by him." Cashin laughed. "You accepted every other lie." The accusation struck where armor could not. Evander had spent years blaming forged evidence, Seraphine, and grief. Yet deception had succeeded because wounded pride persuaded him that Elowen's supposed betrayal mattered more than the woman he knew. Tomas reached the irrigation levers and pulled them together. Water erupted across the stone floor. Cashin's horses reared, scattering his riders. Freed women entered through the broken doors carrying tools, lantern poles, and the fierce courage of people who had already survived his worst threat. Gideon arrived behind them with royal soldiers. He had delivered the original ledger to the Queen's representative, who now carried warrants bearing the seal. Cashin dragged Elowen onto the old river bridge beyond the glasshouse. Stormwater churned below, and rotten boards shifted under every step. Evander followed without drawing his pistol. One careless shot could endanger her. "She called for you," Cashin taunted. "You heard gossip more clearly." "Yes," Evander answered. The admission unsettled him more than denial would have. "I failed her before you imprisoned her," Evander continued. "I cannot command those years to return. I can only refuse to hide from what they reveal." Elowen watched him, hearing no excuse in his confession. Cashin pulled her backward toward a waiting horse. She reached above her and seized the bridge's warning bell rope. With her concealed metal fragment, she cut through its frayed knot. The iron counterweight crashed between Cashin and his escape route, splintering the railing. His grip loosened. Elowen stepped free and Evander caught her hand. Royal soldiers crossed the bridge and arrested Cashin alive, ensuring he would answer publicly to every woman he had erased. Seraphine was taken beneath the glasshouse arches. She begged Evander to protect the Valehurst name by removing the pages signed by his father. "Our family will become a disgrace," she said. "A name preserved by cruelty deserves to fall. The innocent beneath it deserve to rise." When the soldiers departed, dawn began whitening the storm clouds. Evander approached Elowen beside the river. Leora slept in her arms, wrapped in his coat. He knelt upon the rain-dark stones and opened his hand. The ruby pendant lay across his palm. "I believed you broke our promise," he said. "You carried it through darkness while I stood safely inside a lie. Loving you did not excuse doubting your character. Keeping your rooms unchanged did not rescue you. I have no right to ask that forgiveness be easier than what you endured." Elowen studied the pendant but did not take it immediately. "I survived by remembering the man you were," she said. "But I am not the woman who vanished from that carriage. I do not ask you to become her. Love may survive separation, Evander. Trust must be rebuilt in daylight. Then daylight is where I will remain." He did not rise or reach for her. The choice remained hers. At last, Elowen took the pendant. Her fingers rested briefly against his palm, not as pardon but as permission to begin. Then she placed Leora between them and allowed Evander to stand beside her. The river continued beneath the brightening sky, carrying away leaves, broken branches, and the final ashes of Seraphine's forged ledger. It could not return what had been stolen. But when Leora awakened and closed one hand around each parent's finger, Elowen did not release his. By spring, St. Orizon's no longer resembled a fortress. Elowen ordered the iron numbers removed from every uniform and the locks taken from every inner door. White roses still climbed the walls, but sunlight entered rooms once hidden behind stone. Above the entrance, a new inscription replaced the sanctuary's former crest. "Every woman enters beneath her own name." The original ledger survived. Its records restored stolen estates and traced children sold under false identities. Some reunions were joyful, others brought difficult answers. Cashin and Seraphine faced the royal court together. They blamed servants, each other, and eventually the women they had imprisoned. Their polished defenses collapsed when Ruth Bellamy, Agnes Thorne, Violet Harrow, Mara, and dozens more spoke their names before the crown. Evander delivered the final testimony himself. He read every signature aloud. The Valehurst family surrendered 3 estates and much of its wealth to those robbed by the network. "Honor is not what blood leaves us," Evander told the court. "It is what we choose to repair after blood has failed." Mara confessed without asking to be called innocent. Elowen supported mercy, not forgetfulness. Under strict oversight, Mara dedicated her remaining years to keeping mothers and children together. Tomas received a place at the Royal Academy. He accepted only after Evander promised his education would not separate him from the search for his mother. Her name had been carved upon Elowen's wall, and a record suggested she remained alive in a northern household under another identity. At Valehurst Castle, healing arrived quietly. Elowen returned to her apartments but asked that several rooms be changed. She could not live inside a shrine to the woman she had been. Evander removed nothing without permission. Together they opened the curtains, replanted the herb garden, and placed Leora's cradle beside the window where morning light reached it first. Elowen's nightmares did not vanish. When they woke her, she sometimes found Evander sitting outside her door with a lamp and book. He never entered until invited. On difficult nights she asked him to speak about ordinary matters, the weather, Leora's appetite, or Mrs. Wren's complaints about muddy boots, until the present became stronger than memory. Evander learned fatherhood without dignity. Leora refused sleep unless he walked through the gallery singing badly. Mrs. Wren found the feared Duke tangled in swaddling lace and laughed until she needed a chair. Elowen watched from the doorway, and for the first time her laughter held no shadow of Briar Glen or St. Orizon's. One evening, beside the restored greenhouse, she asked the question Evander had feared. "Do you love me or the wife you preserved in those locked rooms?" He considered before answering. "I mourn the years stolen from us, but I do not want you returned unchanged. The woman before me survived a place designed to erase her, trusted me when I had failed to deserve it, and carried strangers toward freedom. Suffering did not make you worthy, Elowen. It revealed how completely you always were." She took his hand. Their renewed vows were spoken months later inside the riverside chapel where Mara had confessed. No nobles attended for spectacle. Ruth, Agnes, Violet, Gideon, Tomas, Mara, Mrs. Wren, and the reunited families filled the repaired pews. Leora wore ivory lace without servant's cloth covering it. Evander returned the old words engraved upon Elowen's pendant. "Once I promised beyond death," he said. "Now I promise something harder. Here, through every ordinary morning we are still given." Elowen answered that love had carried them through darkness, but truth would keep them in daylight. On Leora's first birthday, they walked to the Blackwater. Its roar awakened Elowen's terror. She stopped at the bank. Evander did not pull her forward or tell her the danger had passed. He merely offered his hand. Elowen placed Leora safely in his arms, then took it. Together they carried an empty flower-covered cradle to the white roses above the eastern channel. Villagers from Briar Glen stood nearby, including those who had mocked Elowen when she lived without a husband and carried a child they called fatherless. They had built a home for unsupported mothers beside Ada Pike's bakery, but Elowen required more than a building. Each villager had written the name of someone they had judged without understanding. The papers were sealed beneath the cradle as a promise that shame would no longer be used as a weapon against the vulnerable. Ada placed the final rose upon its rim. The cradle was not a monument to abandonment. It honored a mother who transformed the only unguarded road into hope. Evander lowered it beside the flowers rather than into the current. The river would carry nothing else away from them. Leora laughed and reached toward the sunlight trembling across the water. Elowen touched the ruby pendant, where a new inscription rested beneath the first. "They found us, but love found us first." Evander looked toward Valehurst Castle, no longer a fortress protecting a powerful name, but a home whose doors stood open to truth. Then he looked at Elowen, waiting as he had promised. She stepped beside him willingly. For once, silence around them carried quiet peace instead of accusation. As morning broke over Blackwater, their reflections joined Leora's upon the river. Three lives once divided by lies, now held together not by the past they had lost, but by every ordinary day they had chosen to keep.